Drop that package. Whose house is this?
It's mine. My name's on it.
Do not do that. Taser! They tasered Jordan.
Onward porch.
No, Jordan!
I'm coming!
I need you to picture something. A 12-year-old boy, his own front porch, a box in his hands with his name printed on the label. He saved up for months to buy what was inside that box. He tracked the package all the way home from school. He picked it up off his own doormat 4 minutes ago. And right now, a police officer is pointing a taser at his chest. That boy is going to be on the ground in 3 seconds. 50,000 volts through a 12-year-old's body on his own front porch, because this officer looked at him, looked at the label with his name on it, and decided, the evidence be damned, that he already knew what was happening here. Now, before I go one word further, I want to tell you 2 things. The first thing is this. A retired Army sergeant, 24 years of service, 3 doors down, a man who taught this boy how to check the oil in a car, walked across the lawn and told that officer 3 separate times who that child was. Clearly, calmly, in plain English, the officer deployed the taser anyway. The second thing is this. That boy's mother is the district attorney for Hargrove County. She gets a phone call 11 minutes after this happens. And what she does next, the next 72 hours, the next 7 months, the next 5 years, is going to result in that officer sitting in a federal prison cell, the city of Hargrove writing a check for $1.4 million, and a nationwide change to use of force policy that is still being taught in police academies today. But here is the thing that I cannot get out of my head when I think about this story. Before that boy ever walked out onto that porch, before any of this happened, there were 5 other people who had already tried to warn somebody about this officer. 5 complaints. 5 families. 5 times the system was handed the information it needed to stop what was coming. 5 times it did nothing. So before you write this off as a story about one rogue cop, I need you to understand. What happened on that porch was not an accident. It was an appointment. And somebody in that police department made that appointment 5 separate times by choosing paperwork and convenience over the people they were supposed to protect. I am going to take you through every moment of this story. The porch, the arrest, the phone call, the station, the investigation, the courtroom, and what happened after, to the officer, to the boy, to the 5 families who came before him, and to the department that is still living with the consequences of looking the other way. Stay with me. Every minute of this story matters. There is a particular kind of American neighborhood that does not make the magazines and does not get featured on the home renovation programs, but that men of a certain age and a certain background recognize immediately as the real thing. Birchwood Lane was that neighborhood. The houses went up in the early 1970s, solid construction, brick fronts, proper roof lines, built by tradesmen who assumed these things would still be standing 50 years later, and were right. The trees along the sidewalk had been planted as saplings when the neighborhood was new and had grown over the intervening decades into something substantial. Old enough now to throw serious, honest shade across the front yards on a summer afternoon. Lawns were maintained. Flags flew. People knew each other's names and their dogs' names, and roughly what time of year to expect certain vehicles in certain driveways. A retired man could sit on his front porch on a Tuesday afternoon and watch a street go about its business and feel, for a few minutes, that the world was more or less as it was supposed to be. Jordan Carter had lived at 2218 Birchwood Lane his entire life. He was 12 years old. 7th grade at Jefferson Middle School. B student, strong in science and history, recently joined the track team because his mother approved of giving young men a structured place to put their energy. He was the kind of boy that older men in a neighborhood notice without having to think about it. The boy who looks you in the eye when he talks to you, says sir without being coached, works for things he wants rather than expecting them to materialize. Jordan had been saving since February. His grandfather had sent him $50 for his birthday. A card with a handwritten note inside, the old-fashioned kind, in actual ink, that said your grandmother and I are proud of you. Spend it on something that makes you happy. Jordan had spent 3 weeks deciding what that something was. He landed on a video game he had been reading about since the previous fall. He ordered it. He tracked the package the way only a kid who has been waiting for something can track a package. Every morning before school, again at lunch from his phone in the cafeteria, and again walking home. The app said, delivered, 4:09 p.m. Jordan pushed open his front door at 4:14. The box was on the mat. He picked it up. He turned the label toward him the way a person does when they already know what it says, but want to see it confirmed anyway. The particular pleasure of a good thing arriving. Jordan Carter, 2218 Birchwood Lane. He smiled. Then he heard a car door. I want you to stop here with me for a moment. hold that image. A 12-year-old boy on his own front porch, his name on the label, smiling, because something he saved for and waited for has finally arrived. Think about your grandson, your neighbor's kid, the boy on your street who shovels the walk in winter and mows in summer and is standing at that particular age where he is trying, quietly, to figure out what kind of man he is going to be. Because what happens next to Jordan Carter on that porch, on that Tuesday afternoon in late spring, is something that should not happen to any boy on any street in this country. And what happens after, what his mother does, what the neighbor does, what the courts do, is a story about accountability, about consequences, about the idea that a badge is supposed to mean something. Before I tell you about the officer, I need to tell you about the neighbor, because in this story, the neighbor is the hinge everything else swings on. Walter Simmons was 69 years old, retired United States Army, 24 years of service, came up through the enlisted ranks to Sergeant First Class, deployed 4 times in a career that took him to places most people only see on maps. He had been back in the civilian world for 15 years, and had spent those 15 years doing what men do when they have given a substantial portion of their lives to an institution, and now belong entirely to themselves. He tended a garden. He restored an old truck in the garage, taking his time with it. He sat on the porch in the mornings with his coffee, and watched Birchwood Lane go about its business. Walt had watched Jordan Carter grow up from a small boy trailing his father across the front yard, to the young man who now mowed Walt's grass every 2 weeks without being asked more than once. Walt had taught the boy how to check the oil in a car the previous summer, where the dipstick was, how to read it, the way men used to pass that kind of knowledge from one generation to the next as a simple matter of course. On this Tuesday afternoon, Walt was on his porch with a glass of iced tea and a naval history book he had been working through for 3 weeks. He had his reading glasses on. He was making good progress on a chapter about the Pacific Theater. He registered the delivery truck going through without much attention, because delivery trucks came through Birchwood Lane every day now, multiple times. He saw Jordan come out and pick up the package. He noted it the way you note something familiar. Kid getting a package, nothing unusual. Then he saw the patrol car pull to the curb. Walt set down his book. He had spent 24 years in the United States Army reading body language in situations where reading it correctly was the difference between going home and not going home. And what he saw walking across the sidewalk toward Jordan Carter's porch was not an officer responding to an uncertain situation. It was an officer who had already reached a conclusion. Walt stood up from his chair. Right here, before we go any further, I need to ask you something directly. If you are a man who believes a child should be able to stand on his own front porch and pick up his own package, a package with his name printed on it, without being treated like a criminal, then I want you to take 5 seconds right now and subscribe to this channel. We tell the stories that the system would prefer to stay quiet. We follow them all the way through, the incident, the investigation, the consequences, and the reforms that come after when the right people refuse to look away. This story is not over yet. It builds. And the places it goes are the places I think every man of our generation needs to see clearly. Stay with me. Officer Kyle Brennan was 37 years old, with 9 years on the Hargrove City Police Department. 9 years is not nothing. 9 years is enough time to know the law with your eyes closed. It is enough time to develop the professional habits that make a good officer reliable and effective in the community he serves. It is enough time to understand, deeply, not just in theory, the constitutional limits within which police work is required to operate. It was also, as the record would show, enough time to develop a pattern. 5 complaints. 5 separate people over 9 years. 5 individuals who had done nothing wrong, been stopped or questioned or detained, and had taken the time. And it does take real time, and real courage, and a certain exhausted faith in a system that had not done much to earn it from these particular people, to file a formal complaint. First, a black man in his 50s, questioned in a grocery store parking lot for loading bags into his own car, because Brennan said he appeared nervous. Second, a Latino man in his 30s, pulled over because his car was, in Brennan's own report words, inconsistent with the neighborhood, meaning a newer vehicle in a predominantly white area had attracted attention for reasons that had nothing to do with traffic law. Third, a black teenager, detained on a sidewalk for 25 minutes because Brennan said he matched the description of someone reported in the area, a description from an incident 2 weeks prior involving someone 8 inches shorter. Fourth, a black woman, asked to prove she owned the bicycle she was riding in her own apartment complex parking lot. Fifth, a Latino family questioned in a city park because Brennan said they appeared to be surveilling the area. All 5 complaints were in the personnel file. All 5 had been reviewed by supervisors. All 5 had been closed without any disciplinary action that materially changed how Brennan operated on patrol. 1 generated a note to complete additional documentation training. 1 generated a verbal counseling session with a sergeant, the contents of which were not recorded anywhere. The other 3 were closed with a notation that the complaint had been reviewed and no policy violation was found. 5 warnings. 5 chances for an institution to look at what it had and decide to do something about it before it became something that could not be managed quietly. 5 times the institution picked the path of least resistance. On a Tuesday afternoon in late May, the bill for those 5 decisions came due. Brennan was on his patrol route when he turned onto Birchwood Lane at 4:11 p.m. He saw Jordan Carter on the porch holding a package. He made a decision in approximately 3 seconds. A decision that had nothing to do with anything Jordan had done, and everything to do with a set of assumptions that 9 years of unchecked behavior had calcified into something Brennan had probably stopped recognizing as a choice at all. He pulled to the curb. He got out. He walked toward the porch. Jordan looked up when he heard the car door. He saw the cruiser at the curb and assumed, the way a 12-year-old boy with no reason to think otherwise would assume, that whatever the officer was doing had nothing to do with him. He was wrong. Brennan reached the bottom of the porch steps. His expression was not the expression of a man approaching an uncertain situation. It was the expression of a man approaching something he has already classified. "Hey, what are you doing on this porch? Whose package is that?" Jordan blinked. The words were familiar, but the context made no sense. "It's mine. I live here." "No, you don't. I know who lives in this house." "Try again." There are moments in a child's life that leave marks that do not heal cleanly. Not the dramatic moments, necessarily. Not the falls or the fevers or the visible injuries. The marks that go deepest are sometimes the ones that arrive in a moment of pure, bewildering injustice. When a child understands for the first time with his whole body, not just his mind, that being right and being believed are not the same thing. That some people in positions of authority will look directly at the truth and choose not to see it. But Jordan was his mother's son. He steadied himself. He turned the package around so the label faced the officer. "My name is Jordan Carter. This is my house. 2218 Birchwood Lane. Look at the label. Jordan Carter. That's me." Brennan looked at the label. He read the name. He looked back at Jordan. And then he laughed. Not a laugh of embarrassed recognition. Not the relieved laugh of a man who has just understood he made a mistake. The comfortable laugh of a man who has decided the evidence in front of him is irrelevant because it contradicts a conclusion he has no intention of revising. "You expect me to believe that package belongs to you?" "It does. It's a video game I ordered. I've been waiting for it for weeks. Opening mail that doesn't belong to you is a federal crime. Theft. Mail fraud. I need you to put the package down and step toward me." The fear was in Jordan's voice now, the way fear gets in, even when you are trying to keep it out. "I didn't open anyone's mail. It's my package. I ordered it myself." Brennan started up the steps. His right hand moved toward his belt, not his weapon, his handcuffs. "Step toward me and turn around." Jordan did what any 12-year-old boy, alone on a porch, facing something terrifying and senseless, would do. He turned toward the door. He ran. He called out the name of the only person he knew could make this stop. "Mom. Somebody. Mom." Brennan was faster. He caught Jordan by the arm before the boy reached the door and pulled him back with enough force that Jordan stumbled and the package hit the porch floor. Brennan's grip tightened. "You are under arrest. Stop fighting me. I live here." "I'm not fighting. Please. I live here." "I said stop." "Mom. Mom." 3 doors down, Walt Simmons was no longer standing on his porch. He had come off it the moment Brennan started up those steps and was now walking across the yards with the purposeful, unhurried stride of a man who has made a decision and does not need to run to execute it. He reached the edge of the Carter front lawn and spoke clearly. Not loudly. Clearly. "Officer, that boy lives in that house. I have lived on this street for 14 years. I have watched that child grow up. His name is Jordan Carter. His mother is Sandra Carter. They have been at this address his entire life. I need you to let go of him." Brennan turned without releasing Jordan. His tone was the confident tone of a man who does not expect to be successfully challenged. "Sir, I need you to step back. I have this situation under control. You do not have this situation under control. You have a 12-year-old child by the arm on his own property. Let go of him. Sir, step back." Walt Simmons had been in situations in his military career where someone in a position of authority was making a serious mistake and needed to be told so directly. He had learned that there was a right way and a wrong way to handle that. The right way was calmly, clearly, and without giving the other person the option of dismissing you. "My name is Walter Simmons, retired United States Army, Sergeant First Class. I have lived at 2224 Birchwood Lane for 14 years. That boy's name is Jordan Carter, and he lives 3 doors from me, and I am telling you, you have made a serious error. Let go of that child." Brennan looked at him for a moment, then turned back to Jordan, who was still pulling against his grip, his voice cracking the way a 12-year-old's voice cracks when he is trying to be brave and is running out of the ability to do it. "Let me go, please. I'm not lying. I live here. My mom is at work. Please." Brennan's free hand went to his belt. He unclipped the taser. Walt saw it. He said with everything a 24-year Army career put into his voice, "Do not do that." Brennan deployed the taser. The probes hit Jordan in the chest. 50,000 volts went through a 12-year-old boy on his own front porch. His legs gave out beneath him. He went down on the porch boards. His body locked, his muscles seized, and the sound he made was not a scream. It was something worse than a scream. The involuntary gasping of a body that cannot do what a body is supposed to do because something has taken the controls away from it. Walt Simmons had his phone out before Jordan hit the boards. Brennan stepped over the boy's shaking body. He flipped him onto his stomach, pulled his arms behind his back, locked handcuffs on his wrists. Then he lifted Jordan by the arm and dragged him down the porch steps and across the lawn toward the patrol car. Jordan's feet dragged in the grass because his legs were not working yet. The package with his name on it lay on the porch where it had fallen. Walt was recording. He was also on the phone. His voice was completely controlled. "Sandra, it's Walt. You need to go to the Hargrove City Police Station right now. An officer just tasered Jordan on your porch and put him in a cruiser. I have it on video. Go right now. I have to stop here for a moment and say something directly to the men watching this. If you are 65 years old, you were raised in a time when a man who had served his country, lived on a street for 14 years, and knew a child by his first name was someone whose word carried weight." Walt Simmons told that officer, clearly, calmly, with the full authority of a man who has spent his adult life in service, 3 separate times who Jordan Carter was. And the officer dismissed him every single time. That is the part of this story that should make your blood run a little hot. Not hot enough to lose your head. The other kind of hot, the slow kind that does not cool down until something has actually been done about it. Drop a comment below. Tell me, does a neighbor like Walt Simmons exist on your street? And if you were standing in his shoes on that lawn, what do you do? Tell me, and if you have not subscribed yet, do it now. We are not done. Sandra Carter was in her office at the Hargrove County Courthouse when her phone rang. She had been working on closing arguments for a trial resuming the next morning. A legal pad, a stack of files, a cup of coffee gone cold, the kind of meticulous preparation that her reputation was built on. Sandra was the district attorney for Hargrove County, 44 years old, 16 years as a prosecutor, working from junior assistant to the top of the office, through the kind of grinding, get the details right approach to legal work that does not make for dramatic television, but wins cases and builds the kind of reputation that lasts. She saw Walt Simmons' name on her screen and answered on the second ring because Walt Simmons did not call without a reason. His voice came through even and direct. Military men tend to communicate important things without letting panic get into the transmission. "Sandra, I need you to listen carefully. A police officer just tasered Jordan on your front porch and drove away with him. I believe they are taking him to the Hargrove City 2nd Precinct. I recorded the entire incident. I'm sending you the video right now. You need to go. There is a particular silence that falls over a person when their mind is refusing to process information, not because it is too complex, but because it is too wrong. Because it violates something so fundamental about how the world is supposed to work, that the brain needs an extra beat to confirm, yes, this is real. Yes, this is happening. Yes, you need to move." Sandra Carter's silence lasted 4 seconds. "Where did they take him?" "2nd Precinct. That's the district for our street. Send me everything." She ended the call. She watched the video Walt sent while standing at her desk. She watched it without sitting down. Brennan walking up to her porch. Jordan holding up the package label. Brennan laughing at it. Jordan running for the door. Brennan grabbing her son. Walt coming across the yard saying clearly and calmly that Jordan lived there. Brennan ignoring it. The taser coming out. Her son going down on those porch boards with his face against the wood. She set the phone face down on the desk. She picked up her jacket. Her briefcase. She walked out. She did not stop to speak to her assistant. She did not make another call until she was in the elevator. The call she made going down was to a man named Raymond Okafor, 22 years handling federal civil rights cases against law enforcement. The kind of attorney that insurance adjusters at municipal carriers recognized by name and did not look forward to seeing on a filing. "Raymond, I need you to file a federal civil rights suit against the Hargrove City Police Department. My son is 12 years old. An officer just tasered him on our front porch and arrested him for picking up his own package. I have the video. The officer has 5 prior complaints on record. I need you to start building this case today." Raymond Okafor said 3 words. "Send me everything." Sandra drove to the 2nd Precinct in 11 minutes. There are two ways a person can walk into a police station, demanding the release of a wrongfully detained child. The first way is loud, raised voice, visible distress, the kind of entrance that gives the desk staff something to manage and therefore something to delay. The second way is quiet, focused, the way a person walks in when they have been in high-stakes rooms for 16 years and have learned that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most effective one. Sandra Carter did it the second way. She walked through the front doors of the Hargrove City 2nd Precinct at 5:22 p.m. and approached the desk sergeant with the bearing of a woman who knows exactly what she has and exactly what she intends to do with it. My son was brought in approximately 40 minutes ago. His name is Jordan Carter. He is 12 years old. He was arrested on his own front porch while picking up a package with his name on the label. The desk sergeant typed. His expression changed. "Ma'am, if you could take a seat, a supervisor can." Sandra leaned forward slightly. Her voice dropped, which made it more effective, not less. "I am Sandra Carter. I am the district attorney for Hargrove County. Jordan Carter is my son. I have video of your officer tasering him and handcuffing him on our front porch, recorded by a retired United States Army Sergeant First Class, who told your officer 3 separate times that Jordan lived at that address, and your officer ignored him every single time. I need your chief out here in the next 2 minutes. If that does not happen, the video currently in my possession will be at every local news station before the hour is out." The desk sergeant stood up. He was gone 60 seconds. Chief Dennis Harlow, 56 years old, 28 years in law enforcement, the last 6 as chief, was a careful man who had spent his career avoiding exactly this kind of situation. When his desk sergeant appeared in his doorway and delivered a single sentence about who was standing in the lobby and why, Harlow had Brennan's personnel file open on his computer before he pushed back from his desk. He saw the 5 complaints. He closed the file. He walked out. Sandra did not give him time to open with something diplomatic. "Where is my son?" Chief Harlow looked at her with the expression of a man who has absorbed the full weight of what is happening and has the decency not to pretend it away. "Mrs. Carter, I am going to have Jordan brought out to you right now. And I want you to know. Bring him out uncuffed." "Yes, ma'am." He gave the instruction. Then he turned back and did something that not every man in his position would have done. He said, "I am sorry. This should not have happened." Sandra looked at him. "No, it should not have. And I need you to understand that sorry is a beginning, not an ending." 4 minutes later, a door at the back of the station opened, and Jordan Carter walked through it. His wrists were raw where the cuffs had been. His shirt had grass stains on it, from being dragged across the lawn. His face had the particular emptiness of a child who has used up everything he had and arrived somewhere past exhaustion. But when he saw his mother, 12 years old, dissolved into something younger, and he came across that lobby fast, and she caught him and held him. She did not speak for a moment. She just held her son and felt him shaking and let him. Then she looked over his head at Chief Harlow. "I want Officer Brennan's badge. I want his body camera footage tonight. I want every record related to this arrest and his complete personnel file on my desk before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I want an internal affairs investigation opened today with written confirmation. And I want to be clear about one more thing." She paused. "I have recused myself from any prosecutorial role in this matter because I cannot be both Jordan's mother and Hargrove County's district attorney in the same case. But I am still a lawyer. And Raymond Okafor is already building a federal civil rights case. So how this department responds in the next 24 hours will matter a great deal." Chief Harlow nodded once. "You will have everything by morning." Sandra took Jordan's hand. They walked out. Walt Simmons arrived at the 2nd Precinct the following morning at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before his scheduled interview with internal affairs investigators. He wore a pressed button-down shirt and slacks, the way men of his generation dress when they have something serious to say to people in an official capacity. His service record, summarized on a single sheet, was in his breast pocket. Not because he expected to need it, because he believed in being prepared. The interview took 45 minutes. Walt sat across a table and told them exactly what he had seen, in sequence, from the moment Brennan's cruiser pulled to the curb to the moment it drove away with Jordan in the back seat. He did not embellish. He did not editorialize. He stated what he observed with the precision of a man who has spent a career making accurate reports in high-pressure situations and knows the difference between what you saw and what you interpreted. He told them he had walked to the edge of the property line, identified himself clearly, told Brennan 3 separate times, in plain English, that Jordan Carter lived at 2218 Birchwood Lane and had lived there his entire life. That Brennan had dismissed him each time. That he had specifically said, aloud, distinctly, "Do not do that," when he saw Brennan reach for the taser. That Brennan had deployed it anyway. His voice did not waver. His hands stayed folded on the table. He made eye contact with both investigators and did not look away. When they finished, one of the investigators thanked him for coming in. Walt picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Then he said something that was not in response to any question they had asked, because some things need to be said for the record, even when nobody thinks to ask for them. I want to be clear about what I saw on that porch. I saw a 12-year-old boy show a police officer his name on a package. I saw that officer refuse to accept it. I saw that boy try to get into his own home and get grabbed for it. I told that officer 3 times who that child was. I am a retired sergeant first class of the United States Army. I have told the truth in considerably more difficult situations than this one. None of it mattered to that officer. He put on his jacket. I want that in the record, exactly as I said it, because Jordan Carter deserves to know that someone who was there saw what happened and is willing to say so. He walked out. The video Walt had recorded was already moving through the world. Sandra had sent it to 2 local television stations the previous evening, not because she needed press coverage, but because she understood, from 16 years of watching how institutions respond to problems, that public visibility is one of the most reliable ways to prevent a story from being quietly managed into irrelevance. The stations ran it on the 11 o'clock news. By morning it was on social media. By noon it had 9 million views. By the following evening, 34 million. By the end of the second day, 50 million. There is something about video evidence that arguments and written statements and formal complaints cannot fully replicate. You can dispute a narrative. You can challenge a written account. You can raise questions about memory and perspective and the complexity of fast-moving situations. You cannot dispute what a camera recorded. The footage was 51 seconds, from the moment Walt started recording to the moment Brennan's cruiser left the curb. In those 51 seconds, you could watch Jordan hold the label toward the officer. You could watch Brennan read the name and laugh. You could watch Jordan turn for his own door and be grabbed. You could hear Walt's voice, clear, calm, authoritative, saying Jordan lived there. You could hear Brennan dismiss it. You could watch the taser come out. You could watch Jordan go down. And you could hear Jordan's voice. That is the part people could not get past. Not the image, as awful as the image was. The voice. High and scared, and not quite understanding what was happening. Calling for his mother with the particular unguarded desperation that belongs only to children, that quality of absolute need that adults lose somewhere along the way and forget they ever carried. That voice, playing on screens across the country, did something that statistics and policy arguments rarely do. It made the situation personal. By the third day, the Hargrove City Police Department's press office had released 3 separate statements, each slightly more alarmed in tone than the one before, all promising thorough investigations and expressing concern, none of them saying anything that satisfied anyone. The reason they satisfied nobody became apparent when the local newspaper published a summary of Officer Kyle Brennan's personnel file, obtained through a public records request. 5 complaints, all from Black or Latino residents, all describing the same essential pattern. All closed without meaningful discipline. The pattern had been in that file the entire time. Every supervisor who reviewed and closed those complaints had looked at a piece of it and passed it forward. Nobody had assembled the pieces into what they were, or if they had decided that assembling them formally was more trouble than it was worth. Now the pieces were on the front page, and what they formed was not complicated. I want to pause right here, because I think this moment in the story speaks directly to men of our generation. We were raised with a particular understanding of how authority is supposed to work. A man earns it. A man in a position of power is held to a higher standard, not a lower one, because that is what wearing a badge or carrying a rank has always meant. And when people inside an institution see a problem developing and choose convenience over accountability, they do not just fail the next victim. They fail every person who ever believed that institution meant what it said it stood for. Walt Simmons believed that. Jordan Carter believed that. His mother built a career around it. Leave me a comment. Tell me what accountability means to you personally. Not in the abstract. Personally. I read every single one. This conversation matters. The internal affairs investigation into Officer Kyle Brennan was opened the afternoon of the incident and moved with a speed that people familiar with how such investigations normally proceed described, privately, as remarkable. It moved quickly because there was nothing to sort through slowly. Brennan's own body camera had been running. His footage, from his perspective, showed everything that Walt's footage had shown from the neighbor's perspective. You could watch Brennan process Jordan's face and reach a conclusion in approximately 3 seconds. You could watch him walk to the porch with his mind already made up. You could watch Jordan hold the label toward him. You could watch him read it. And then you could watch him proceed as though he had not read it, as though the name printed on that label in plain black ink was not information that applied to the conclusion he had already reached. The GPS data from Brennan's patrol car showed that he had slowed on Birchwood Lane within seconds of passing the Carter house and come to a full stop at the curb before Jordan had done anything except stand on a porch holding a box. Investigators also pulled Brennan's complete stop-and-frisk records from his 9 years on the force and cross-referenced them with department data on neighborhood demographics. The pattern was consistent with what the 5 complaints described and consistent with what both cameras showed. Stops concentrated in certain neighborhoods involving certain people, with documentation long on vague language about subjects appearing nervous and short on anything that constituted specific articulable suspicion. The investigation also examined how all 5 prior complaints had been handled. What it found was not a story of reasonable supervisors making difficult calls on genuinely ambiguous situations. It was a story of institutional convenience, a quiet understanding that complaints of this type, from these particular complainants, were to be managed rather than investigated, closed rather than resolved, filed rather than acted upon. 3 supervisors were identified as having failed to meet the department's own standards for complaint review. 1 had closed a complaint without interviewing a witness identified in the original filing. 1 had marked a complaint resolved without documenting what the resolution was. 1 had reviewed 2 complaints against Brennan within 8 months, noted a potential pattern in his own internal memo, and then closed both complaints without escalating the pattern to anyone above him. The investigation concluded in 22 days. The findings were specific and unsparing. Brennan had engaged in racial profiling. He had made a stop without probable cause, violating the 4th Amendment. He had used force against a minor in circumstances that did not meet the department's use of force policy for any subject, let alone a 12-year-old child who posed no physical threat to anyone. He had ignored multiple credible repeated statements from an identified witness that the subject was a resident of the property. He had arrested a child on a charge directly and visibly contradicted by physical evidence he had personally inspected before making the arrest. The recommendation was termination. Chief Harlow approved it the same afternoon the report arrived on his desk. Brennan was called in, informed of the findings, and told that his employment was terminated effective immediately. His state law enforcement certification was submitted for revocation 2 weeks later. At 37, after 9 years, his career in law enforcement was over. He appealed the termination. The appeal was denied. The review board found the evidence too complete and the pattern too well documented to justify any other outcome. He did not appeal again. Termination was not the end of it. This is the part of the story that needs to be understood clearly, because there is sometimes an assumption, particularly in cases involving law enforcement, that losing the job is where the consequences stop. That the badge going away is the full price, and everything after is a footnote. In this case, it was not a footnote. A special prosecutor was appointed from outside Hargrove County to eliminate any conflict arising from Sandra Carter's position as district attorney. The special prosecutor reviewed the body camera footage, Walt Simmons's recorded testimony, the medical records from Jordan's examination the morning after the incident, 2 probe wounds on his chest, bruising on both wrists consistent with the handcuffing, and Brennan's complete personnel history. She convened a grand jury within 6 weeks of the incident. The grand jury returned an indictment on 4 counts: assault on a minor, excessive use of force under color of law, false imprisonment, violation of civil rights under color of law. The criminal trial took place 7 months after the incident. It lasted 4 days. The jury heard from Walt Simmons, who testified with the same precision and composure he had brought to the internal affairs interview. They heard from Jordan's pediatrician, who documented the injuries. They heard from a use of force expert who testified that deploying a taser against a nonviolent 12-year-old did not meet the standard of reasonable force under any interpretation of department policy or constitutional law. They watched both cameras. They watched Brennan read Jordan's name on that label, and then proceed as though he had not. They deliberated for 2 hours and 40 minutes. They returned guilty verdicts on all 4 counts. Officer Kyle Brennan was sentenced to 18 months in a federal correctional facility and 3 years of supervised probation. His law enforcement certification was permanently revoked. He would never again work in any capacity that required a badge. Raymond Okafor filed the federal civil rights lawsuit 20 days after the incident. The complaint was 73 pages long by the time it went in, supported by evidence that left the city's legal team very little room to work. The lawsuit named Brennan and the city of Hargrove as defendants. It brought claims for excessive force, unlawful detention, assault and battery on a minor, violation of Jordan's 4th and 14th Amendment rights, and deliberate institutional indifference to a documented pattern of misconduct. That last claim directed specifically at the city's repeated failure to address the 5 prior complaints. The city's attorneys reviewed every piece of evidence: the footage, the GPS data, the medical documentation, the personnel file, the internal affairs report, the grand jury indictment, and they made the determination that any competent legal team makes when the evidence leaves no viable path to a defense in front of a jury. They sat down and started talking. The settlement was finalized 11 weeks after the filing. $1.4 million. At the time, among the largest civil rights settlements involving a minor in the state's history. The payment was the number that made the headlines. The reforms were the part that mattered for what came after. As part of the agreement, the Hargrove City Police Department accepted a set of mandatory, auditable, enforceable reforms. Every officer was required to complete updated training in constitutional policing, implicit bias, and de-escalation. Not a one-time session, but a recurring program with documented completion requirements. A new policy was established specifically prohibiting taser deployment against subjects under 14, except in situations involving an imminent threat of serious bodily harm. An independent civilian oversight board with genuine investigative authority, not an advisory panel, not a committee that made recommendations the department could ignore, but a body with power to subpoena records and compel testimony, was established and required to be operational within 90 days. Body camera footage was to be audited quarterly by an outside contractor. And a formal early intervention system was mandated. Any officer with more than one complaint in a 12-month period automatically flagged for supervisory review. That last one was the direct structural answer to the thing that had made everything else possible. Sandra Carter used a portion of the settlement to establish a foundation. She named it the Jordan Carter Foundation. It provides legal assistance and advocacy for children who experience police violence or racial profiling. It also funds training programs for officers on interactions with juveniles and supports communities working to implement accountability at the local level. Jordan, who was 13 by the time the foundation launched, was primarily focused on not having a foundation named after him. But he came around on it eventually. Right here, right now, man to man. I want to say something that I believe down to my bones. Justice came in this case. It came slowly, and it came imperfectly. And it came only because a retired soldier named Walt stood at a property line and refused to step back. And because a mother who knew the law used every tool available to her to make sure this story did not get quietly managed into silence. But for the 5 families who filed complaints before Jordan's name ever came up, for those 5 people who walked into offices, filled out forms, told the truth, and walked out with nothing to show for it, justice did not come. Not then, not when they needed it. That is the part of this story I want you to sit with. Because accountability that only arrives when the right combination of circumstances forces it is not really accountability. It is luck, and children should not have to rely on luck. Tell me in the comments, what should have happened after complaint number 1? I want to know what you think, because I think you already know the answer, and I think it matters that you say it out loud. Kyle Brennan reported to a federal correctional facility 8 weeks after sentencing. He served the full 18 months. He was released on probation and moved to a different state, which is what people sometimes do when a name and a face have become permanently attached to something that follows them everywhere they try to go. It follows him anyway. Background checks surfaced the conviction immediately. The nature of the conviction, assault on a minor, appears in full. Every job application he completes requires him to disclose his criminal conviction and the circumstances of his termination from law enforcement. He has not been able to find work in law enforcement. He has not been able to find work in private security. He was working, as of the last public reporting on his situation, in a retail capacity in a city several hundred miles from Hargrove. I am not telling you this to feel satisfied by it. There is nothing to feel satisfied by in this story. Jordan Carter still has scars on his chest from where the taser probes hit him. He spent 2 years in therapy. He is 17 now, and, by all accounts, doing well. High school track team, serious student, has talked about wanting to study law like his mother. But he was 12 when it happened. And that Tuesday afternoon on the porch, the moment that officer's hand went to the taser, is going to be part of his story in a way that cannot be removed. What I am telling you about Brennan's life after is because consequences are supposed to mean something. Because the 5 families who filed complaints years before, who did everything right and walked away with nothing, deserve to know that eventually the pattern produced a result the institution could not look away from. That their documentation mattered. That their complaints, sitting in that file that investigators eventually pulled, were part of what made the case what it was. Every one of those 5 complaints is in the public record of this case. Every one of them contributed to the finding of institutional indifference that made the settlement as large as it was. Those 5 families were not heard when they needed to be heard. But they were part of the thing that ultimately forced the institution to answer. 5 years after the settlement, the reforms are still in place in Hargrove City. That is worth noting, because mandatory reforms in civil rights settlements do not automatically survive. The pressure that produces them fades, the public attention moves on, and institutions have a gravitational pull toward the way things were done before if nobody is actively maintaining the new structure. In Hargrove, the Civilian Oversight Board has maintained its authority and exercised it. In 5 years, it has reviewed 41 use-of-force complaints. 17 were escalated for formal investigation. 3 resulted in officer discipline. 2 resulted in termination. The early intervention system has flagged 11 officers for supervisory review. 8 completed required retraining and returned to patrol. 3 resigned during the review process rather than completed. The Taser policy covering juvenile subjects has been cited in training materials used by law enforcement agencies in 4 other states, as an example of specific, unambiguous policy language that removes the interpretive wiggle room officers sometimes claim when use-of-force incidents are reviewed. Has racial profiling been eliminated in Hargrove? No. I am not going to tell you it has. What the reforms have produced is a department with systems capable of catching patterns earlier and responding to them more consistently than the system that allowed Kyle Brennan to accumulate 5 complaints over 9 years without meaningful intervention. That is not everything. It is something real. The case is now used in law enforcement training programs in 9 states. The combined footage, Brennan's body camera and Walt's recording, is shown in police academies as a documented example of how unconscious assumption becomes conscious action, how a decision made in 3 seconds produces consequences that last decades, and why the humanity of the person standing in front of you cannot be subordinated to the conclusion you arrived with. Jordan Carter spoke at a state legislative hearing when he was 15. He stood at a podium and spoke without notes for 4 minutes. The room was quiet the entire time. He did not speak with anger. He spoke with the particular clarity that comes from having lived something and had enough time to understand what it means. He said that what happened on his porch was not just a story about one bad officer. It was a story about a system that had been told, 5 separate times, that something was wrong, and had decided each time that it was someone else's problem. He said the people who filed those 5 complaints had believed in the system enough to tell it the truth, and the system had let them down. He said he did not want to be the last story about what happens when warnings go unheeded. He wanted to be the story that made people take the warning seriously before the next Jordan Carter. He sat down. The room applauded for a long time. Here is what I want to leave you with. And I want to say it as plainly as I know how, because this is not a complicated idea even when the machinery around it makes it feel like one. A 12-year-old boy standing on his own front porch, holding a box with his own name on it, is not a suspect. He is not suspicious. He is not a problem. He is a child in front of his own house, and the law, the same law written by men who understood what it meant to live under authority that could stop and search and detain you without justification, protects him from exactly what happened to him that afternoon. A badge does not change that. A badge was never meant to change that. A badge is an instrument of the law, not a suspension of it. The officer who carries one is required to work within the same constitutional boundaries that apply to every American institution. When he does not, there is a price. And in this case, the price was paid in full. But here is the part that stays with me. The part one think should stay with you. The price was paid because Sandra Carter was the district attorney. Because Walt Simmons had his phone out and the nerve to keep it out when an officer in uniform told him to step back. Because Raymond Okafor had 22 years of experience building exactly this kind of case. Because the body camera captured everything, and the GPS data confirmed everything, and the medical records documented everything. The 5 families who filed complaints before Jordan's name ever entered this story did not have all of those things working in their favor. They had the truth. They had the experience of what happened to them. They had the forms they filled out and the offices they walked into, and the patience to follow the process. And they got nothing. That is the thing I want you to carry out of this story, because it matters more than the verdict or the settlement or the footage or the reforms. The system worked, eventually, in this case. It worked because the circumstances forced it to. And for the 5 people who came before Jordan, it did not work. They did everything right, and nobody in a position to act decided it was enough to act on. Men of our generation understand something about institutions. We have worked in them, served in them, built things inside of them. We know that institutions do not fix themselves. They fix themselves when enough people inside them or around them decide that the cost of not fixing the problem is higher than the cost of fixing it. Walt Simmons standing at that property line was one version of that calculation. Sandra Carter walking into that station was another. Raymond Okafor filing that 73-page complaint was another. And the 5 families who filed those earlier complaints, years before Jordan's name ever entered the story, were the foundation that all of it was built on. Accountability does not arrive from nowhere. It accumulates. It is built, complaint by complaint, testimony by testimony, recording by recording, refusal by refusal to look away and let the problem pass. Walt Simmons did not look away. Sandra Carter did not look away. And whatever you believe about the specifics of this case or the broader questions it raises, I think most men who have lived long enough and seen enough would agree on the basic proposition. A child on his own front porch, holding his own package, deserves to be believed. The people responsible for protecting that child, from the officers on patrol to the supervisors reviewing complaints to the chief sitting in his office, bear a responsibility that does not disappear because it is inconvenient to exercise. It accumulates, and eventually, whether they act on it or not, it arrives. In this case, it arrived at $1.4 million, and a man in a federal correctional facility and a 17-year-old boy speaking to a state legislature with scars on his chest. The lesson was expensive. It was entirely preventable, and it was the direct and traceable result of 5 separate decisions, made by 5 separate supervisors, to look at a warning and pass it forward. Do not pass it forward. That is the end of this story. But I want to close with the question that has been sitting at the center of it from the beginning. Walt Simmons, 69 years old, retired military. He was sitting on his porch on a Tuesday afternoon, minding his business, 3 doors down from a boy he had watched grow up. He had a book in his lap and a glass of iced tea. He had nowhere to be. He did not have to stand up. He did not have to walk over. He did not have to pull out his phone, or say what he said 3 times to a man in uniform who was not listening, or hold his ground at that property line when that officer told him to step back. But he did all of it, because a child he knew needed someone to do it, and he was the person who was standing there. Here is my question for you. Not rhetorical. I want your real answer. If you were Walt, if it was your Tuesday afternoon, your porch, your glass of iced tea, and that was your neighbor's kid being grabbed at the top of those steps, what do you do? I think you already know. Tell me in the comments. Tell me what you would do, and tell me what you think the men on your street would do. Because I believe the answer to that question tells us something important about what kind of neighborhoods we want to live in, and what kind of men we intend to be when it counts. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that decency and accountability and refusing to look away when a child needs someone to see what is happening are not small things, are not optional things, are in fact some of the most important things a man can do with a Tuesday afternoon, share it. Share it with your sons. Share it with your grandsons. Share it with the men on your street who are the Walt Simmons of their neighborhoods and may not yet know it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, because we are not stopping until accountability is the rule, not the exception, the rule.